Ladies and gentlemen, today we are talking about one of my favorite chess players in the world. She is the reigning women's chess world champion, Wenjun. But more than that, I'm here to tell you she may be one of the most dominant world champions we've ever had in chess. And you can talk about that in the comments. But let me show you what I'm talking about. A couple there's a summary there just above the main screen that we're looking at of her current accolades, but I'm looking at the WSCC, the Women's Speed Chess Championship. Jun has just won it, and she won it convincingly. She had two closest games. That was in the quarterfinals. So she qualified direct. She didn't have to play in round one. So she was seeded into the quarterfinals, where she won 10.5, 8.5 against Bibisara. That was probably the closest game of the match in the quarterfinals. She then put in a record performance, the biggest margin of victory this competition has ever seen, against Polina Shivola, 17 points to 5. And then she, I believe it was yesterday or last night, won the final, an all-Chinese final against Yifan, who's one of the top women's players in history. I mean, at the moment, she's one of the highest rated. Don't see much of her, or I haven't seen much of her lately playing. But she got to the final by beating now GM Divya Deshmukh, who just won the Women's World Cup, Katerina Lagner, who's always around, and then she succumbed to June 11.5, 9.5. It was more convincing for June than the scoreline probably lets on 11.5, 9.5. And now that's like a recap. I could go through the games, but they're a little bit meaningless at this point. But I'm here to talk about June because she is absolutely incredible. We will analyze her best career game, where she defeats Alireza Firouzja, but she's a 5-time classical world champion, a 2-time rapid world champion. She is the current holder of the Blitz world title, and she has just defended, so for the second year running, she has won the Women's Speed Chess Championship. The only person I can think of with those type of accolades is Magnus Carlsen, and he has elected to not defend the classical world title. She is still very much committed to defending hers. So far as I know, I'm not June. So she could become a 6-time world champion, and then she's rivaling Garry Kasparov. Now, of course, you could argue that it's a women's world title, and they're split, and she's only gotten past 2600. She hasn't gotten past 2700. She hasn't played many 2700s. She's played a few. I think she's only got like 30 games against Super GMs at that point. But I'm going to show you in just a few seconds her game against Alireza Firouzja. And that's incredible. So we need to start talking about her as one of the most dominant world champions. Particularly in the last few days, at time of recording, there's been discussion about Gukesh and the legitimacy of his world title. We may have the most dominant and the most legitimate world champion, and it's in the women's section, the women's division, Wenjun, who is just incredible. She's playing brilliant chess for the last few years. She's been world champion for 7 years, 4 defenses and the win. Just defeated Tanjani in convincing fashion, coming from behind, wins the Women's Speed Chess Championship, and could add yet more world titles later this year in the Rapid and Blitz World Championships. Incredible. Now, we're going to have a quick transition. Remember to subscribe. We're trying to hit 1,000 before my 21st birthday next year in September. So, a subscribe goes a long way. But let's go have a look now at her game against Alireza Firouzja. And here we are. Tata Steel 2024. Less than 2 years ago. We're now in August of 2025, so a little more than 12 months ago, but still an incredible performance. At the time, June was 2570, Alireza was 2765, so very much a super GM. This was Tata Steel. June opened with d4, and Alireza played e6, an invitation for the French defense, which June went for. e4, we had d5, and she elected for the exchange French, which I never like seeing because I think it's a little bit boring because the structure ends up very symmetrical. But hey, Wenjun, knight f3, bishop to d6, and c4. Knight f6, and we get this very interesting move c5. You don't always see this, or it's not what you're always told to do, but you push the pawn up early, force the bishop back, and then play bishop to d3, and you just admit that this might be a weakness, and that you may have overcommitted. Castles, castles. Now the bishop gets to develop. We ask it the question, where's it going to go? It hangs around, and then we simply play bishop to e3. Knight to c6, knight bd2, rook e8, and now here a very interesting move, bishop to b5. Puts pressure on the knight. Now that the rook has moved, this knight's pinned. It no longer exerts pressure on d4. Knight to e4, jumping into the center, looking for a trade, because then you would be able to take with the pawn and win this knight. Obviously, Wenjun doesn't go for that. She moves her queen out the way, queen to a4, knight takes d2, knight takes d2, and now bishop to g5, looking for a further exchange. But she takes the knight. Takes, and just simply rook ae1. Not looking to grab this, because you don't need it at the moment, just solidifying this, allowing maybe yourself to take with the pawn, or you can take with the rook. Bishop takes e3, rook takes e3, and we get this exchange of rooks. Queen e8 attacks and defends, but simply rook e1. f5 from Alireza Firouzja. Queen a6. f4, really looking for counterplay to get something going, but she just brings her queen back to f1. Takes, and now this incredible move, queen to d3. Obviously, you can't take this because of the pin. The best move for Alireza here is to play the absolutely shocking queen to b8. To put pressure like this, now this pawn is threatening, and it thinks this is the best continuation for him. Maybe relinquishing this pawn, but grabbing this. And white's structure is still frozen, your structure is equally frozen, but you're going to get much quicker counterplay. You know, we get something like knight to f3, bishop takes f3, maybe something like queen e6, king f8, queen e7 check here, and queen e6 is a draw. Queen e6 is a draw. But anyway, so we get queen to d3 in the game. That's just one continuation. Alireza doesn't find queen to b8. Let's just leave it at that. Instead, he plays e2, which is a blunder because of one move only. Wenjun has only one move here. There's no blue arrow on the board, so I'll make it. She must play g4. g4 is the best move. You kick the bishop back, something like bishop to g6, and then you would get queen takes e2. And that is much better endgame for her, because Alireza's structure is much worse than hers, as I just highlighted a big red blob there. She plays knight to f3, which is a miss, but Alireza blunders again. He plays queen f7, which simply loses to knight to g5. We threaten mate, and we hit the queen. So we have to get queen to g6, and now we get this trade, and this endgame is just much, much better for Wenjun. h6, the knight drops back, and you can get this very nice outpost. You can't defend this pawn, so you're going to be down a pawn, and this structure is going to be rolling. a5, knight takes c6, a4, rook e3, rook a6, knight to b4, rook to g6, g3, and you just keep your structure solid. She makes a slight mistake there, king f8, a little bit, I don't want to say in low time, but low-ish time. King f2, rook e6 check, the king walks over, the great king walk. h4 is a slight inaccuracy, and she is letting Alireza in the game back slightly. King to e8, rook e3, king d7, a3, rook e6 now. King d2 now allows rook f6, so the king's got to come back. Rook f8, how is she going to break through? We get this pawn trade, and now bishop to g2 is wrong, because now we get the open file for the rook. We can repeat, but I've got more moves. Yes, there's check. I can just play king e1, and I'm not afraid. King f2, The bishop moves out the way, and now knight to d1. Rook to b8, and she seems to have found the right coordination. And she is threatening to take the bishop, which she does grab, and now king to g2. Absolutely cold-blooded, and she's still up a pawn, that pawn that she won over there. And this is going to be incredibly difficult for Alireza to defend, and virtually impossible, as the king now begins the walk. A rook trade is obviously completely winning, but this is completely winning without a rook trade, and rook to d8 was the final move that she had to make. She will have infiltrated, she will win more pawns, and there's nothing black can do, and she defeated Alireza Firouzja. She actually had not a bad tournament, considering she was underdog by rating. She pushed Aniz Giri, she then drew against Ian Nepomniachtchi. She lost, unfortunately, to Johan van Foreest, drew Max Varmadan, obviously beat Alireza Firouzja, had draws against Vidit Gujarati, Alexander Donchenko, and world champion Gukesh, and this was the year he would go on to become world champion. Pragdananda Ramesh Babu, she suffered a defeat, a draw against Parham Maksudlu, further defeats against Notbek Abdusatorov and Wei Yi, before drawing against Ding Liren in the final round. So she finished 4.5 out of 13. She was the only 2500, and she was playing Super GMs. Not one player, except Max Varmadan and Jordan van Foreest, were below 2700. Max Varmadan was 2591, so still higher rated than her. And Jordan van Foreest had dropped out of the Super GM club and was 2688. So she had a great tournament, and I remember some of these games she really pushed. And I was so excited for her to beat Alireza Firouzja, because I remember before that, in the game, which game was it? I think it was Anish, and it was against Anish, and it was against Nepo. I think she really pushed, and she nearly had wins. So I was so excited for her to get this win. And she is a class player, and she loves playing these endgames out. So if you want to call her the lady version of Magnus Carlsen, a little bit demeaning, completely demeaning, but she is a very, very good endgame player. We saw that in the World Championship, and we see that in how she beats Alireza Firouzja. So absolutely incredible from Wenjun. She's a very dominant world champion, and I'm all here for it. She's a great, great player, and I don't know who's going to stop her, but it's very exciting in the women's section for chess. Lots of great players, but Wenjun sits at the very top.